Recently, I got involved with a landscape project where a home had changed ownership, and this was the front area that we're going to take a look at mostly, where we redid a lot of that landscaping. We're also going to look at some things that happened in the back area where a deck went up, and then a patio or paver deck went up. And then we'll also, at the very end, just take a quick look at some of the things we did along that back fence to spruce it up, make it look a little bit better. Let's go ahead and get started then. What initially was here was just some white, kind of that marbly, bright white rock that's sold at the big box stores. And the fabric that was used under there was just laid on the ground, so it was immediately exposed to the sun. The rock wasn't deep enough. And then the edging started buckling out as well. So it was just completely a redo situation. Here you can see where a lot of the weeds are coming through because it's just not deep enough, and then a low grade edging also was used. It's buckling out of the soil. I'll mention quickly that one of the reasons we did the landscaping that I'm going to show you how we did it is because of this sump pump discharge line. We wanted to somehow bury that under the landscaping so there wouldn't be a saturation zone on the turf area. Okay, the first thing I always like to do when I'm going to create a new landscape bed, I break out the flexible garden hose. You can also use a rope, an extension cord, but try to make sure it doesn't kink. And this really helps you kind of define what the bed's going to look like. Don't be afraid to look at it from different views. This is from the homeowner's bedroom where they can see how it's going to look. So play with it from different angles before you decide for sure. This is what we came up with, and oftentimes in the center of the yard, you'll see just an island separated from all the landscape. We decided to go ahead and connect that all the way up to the landscaping around the house. And one of the reasons was that discharge hose. We ran that underground all the way up to this area here. Now what happened with that? It worked initially, but there was so much water coming out of there that it ended up draining down the side here, and it just pooled at the very bottom. Well, then that saturation zone just started going over the sidewalk and created kind of a slick area. So long story short, before I say anything else about that, that hose ended up getting just buried in all the way under the sidewalk. So that was our learning curve, that it really didn't work to try to, I guess, water the plants. Okay, once we decided, yeah, this is what we want to go with, we also had the area marked for the utilities. We are going to be planting some trees here going, I would say 12 to 18 inches deep. So you want to make sure you're not going to hit any electrical, cable TV type lines. First step then, I actually did spray this area within that border with a grass killer, and I did it a day before so it dried out well, and I don't think it hurts the plants, especially trees and shrubs, if you get in there and plant quickly after that. So that grass is all going to die off, but we dug our trench with the shovel, and we're using a high quality 20-foot commercial grade edging, and I like to buy those strips because they're not all coiled up. If they're coiled up in one of those boxes, you really do have to get those laid out in the sun, I would say for at least a day, and really heat them up to get that kink out of it. So this is just a better way to go. All right, we've got our trench completely dug, and I'm just taking that soil and I'm just tossing it up into the main area, creating berms, something I always like to do. I also like curves, as you can tell. I'm not a big straight line guy in the landscapes. And then this is going to get graded out, moved around as we plant some of the different plant material. And there you go, we've got our edging completely installed. We've already started to do some of the plantings, a crimson pygmy barberry. This is a prairie statesman Swiss stone pine that's going to stay fairly upright and compact, and a weeping white spruce here is another one. Taylor sunburst lodgepole pine back there, that actually got eaten by rabbits the first season, so we changed it out to a yellow arborvitae. But as you can see, we've got the plants in, we've done some initial grading, we've already removed some of that rock there, and then I'm starting to add some of these bigger rocks for accenting. And you're going to find out that we used a pretty large riprap rock, and this was our main covering. Now you don't have to take all of that rock out of there, and you can have 90% soil. You're still going to have a good enough environment for the plant material, so we're not going to go crazy where every last rock has been removed. Again, adding a few more boulders in there. We did stake these trees with metal posts. It's a pretty windy area that we're working in. Now, since this was an ongoing project, actually it was about 3 to 4 different phases over maybe 2 to 3 years. It was nice to have an available area to put some of that excess fill or excess rock in a low area. We'll show you that in just a little bit, and there it is. We put that rock there before this deck was built, knowing that we were just going to come in here and rock this area with a more decorative type look. And this was also kind of settling in this area, so we knew we had to build it up anyway and get that grade away from the house. So anytime you're working on a project, it's always nice to have a place that you can work with your excess fill ahead of you. Here's a picture then of how we're working over, moving down to the side in there. And a closer look at that side. What happened here, this porch, the concrete front porch, that was a pretty large drop off. I would have bet about 18 inches, so kind of a hazard for falling off. We decided just to go ahead and continue the theme with some larger boulders in here to kind of help contain that soil. And I bet that's, half of a cubic yard, maybe a full cubic yard we used throughout the whole project. And this is going to work just fine for keeping that soil in place. It's a really natural way to do this. One more look at that just before now we're going to start putting on that riprap. It's a 4-inch riprap rock that was chosen. And there we go. We jumped ahead pretty quickly there, but that's a 4 to 5 inch riprap. It's called pretty large rock. A little bit more dramatic statement. I like it. It's not for everybody. You can certainly go with the smaller decorative rock, but this is what we chose, and we've introduced again some of those larger boulders to get a little bit of a variation, contrast. And we've done some planting, but there's certainly room that you could do more if you so choose. One of the other reasons that I like to just take that fill and tossed it up and created some ridges or contours, you can't really tell in there, but since this is a high water table situation, if you're able to get those plants up a little bit higher, they're going to get adapted just a little bit better. There's always a tendency to plant plants too low. This kind of forces us to keep it on the high ground. And after about, I think it's 4 or 5 years ago now, these are doing beautifully in this area. There's an angle from the front then of how that turned out with that riprap rock. And another one from the other angle looking out. And then this area here, that's just going to end up being grass. We'll seed that out, and that'll just become turf in that area. So you can kind of see where that old white rock was right there. How we took that hose, created our border in there. And there, again, is where we use some of that rock, not only under the deck, but it had kind of sloped into the house. So anytime you're going to do landscaping, you want to make sure you've got a grade away from the house. So this rock worked perfect because we're going to actually put black poly over this. Anytime I'm right up against the foundation of a house, I tend to use a 6 mil black poly to make sure you get that drainage. It also acts as weed control. And there you go, right there. As soon as we get the rock on that area, then we'll just go ahead and we'll trim that plastic off up next to the edging. Now, I hadn't mentioned, I typically do not use landscape poly or fabric in my main beds that are away from the house. It's really only that first year, in my opinion, that you have to deal with the weed problem. After that, you tend to get a crust that forms on the top, and I don't find it all that difficult to maintain that bed and keep it mostly weed-free. And there's the same riprap working our way around to the end of the house. And now we came around to the other side of the house. We shifted gears, we finished the one side. This is from the other side facing the house, and we worked our way down this area. Since it's a utility area, I typically do not like to plant much plant material around utilities. I just consider them kind of a fact of home ownership, and no sense drawing attention to them with plants. And typically people, they cram the plants in there trying to hide something, and it just turns into I think a maintenance nightmare, quite honestly. And same riprap, that 4 to 5 inch larger textured rock. Now you can see the comparison at the neighbors. Certainly an option to go with that. We also could have gone with using a combination of that type of rock in there. I've done it before where you take that larger riprap and you do about half of it, half of that level, and then you kind of top dress it with the shovel. You sprinkle it in. Creates a little bit different look, different surface. I like both of them. The homeowner here just chose to go with this rock. And then the deck was completed, and we broke out the hose, figured out what pattern we wanted to go, put that same black poly edging in. It's the most economical for our area, but you could certainly use different edging choices, whether it be concrete, some of the bullet edging, which are brick pavers type that you can nicely do curves and corners. And there you go, we came up, you can see, with the riprap. And I believe this is where we stopped for that season. Now we were going to wait until, in this area, coming off the steps, we were going to put in a paver deck or a patio area where you could have some furniture, maybe one of those little burning kits for evening fires. And here is where that deck or that paver patio is going to go. And you can always either play again around with the hoses. Somebody here had put some paint. I think the initial idea was they were going to leave an area right in front of the house, either for planting, other types of things. I don't know, but it ended up where the deck or the paver deck just went right up to the house. And then we broke out the hose after the contractor had finished that and decided, you know, how are we going to make this kind of blend in here a little bit softer, add some plant material. So this is what we came up with, and now we'll just continue to bring that riprap rock out from under the deck. And a couple de Groots, Spire arborvitaes have done very nicely in there. What I like to do in a patio setting, I don't like to completely screen off the area, but rather have something tall that can block you from a different angle, but leave windows that you can see through, in a sense, like an area that you're not completely sheltered. And there we added quite a few bigger type boulders just to kind of create a different, again, texture, if you want to call it that. You can see that black poly. We'll be tucking that, cutting that, and then tucking it down so you won't see it. But we use that under pretty much that entire deck area. And one of the things about when you're bringing in decorative rock like this, it's always quite dusty. And as soon as you break out that hose, start spraying down that rock, you really can start getting some different sparkles that you hadn't thought were there once you start cleaning it up a little bit. Now, we didn't do a whole lot of planting in there. And oftentimes, too, one of the things I like to do next to an area like this, you're going to be in there often, is I'll sometimes bring that edging right up to the paver area. And that way you've got a natural walkout point right onto the turf. But this deck happened to have a really, really sharp point. It came out a little bit too far. So we decided to force the traffic flow off the steps, where some steppers were put in there that made you kind of walk that natural path and avoid that sharp corner. There's a view from the other angle. We hadn't yet started putting the rock in there. Just a minute, we'll be talking about a birch tree that we also extended that rock out to that area. And just one more view showing the de Groots, the edging. This will all be seeded out where that turf will come right up to the edging. And then the riprap from that view all put in place. Okay, the back area. So we ended up having extra rock. And what do? Are you going to haul it out? And we decided, well, we might as well just continue. So that birch tree was planted, and we actually added that rock around the corner, and that took away the excess. And then you know how landscaping can go. One thing leads to another, and pretty soon you decide, well, you know, I added one more tree, and we decided the vegetable box gardens were added. And so then again, we decided, you know, why not just continue that theme, added some edging, and it was difficult to mow behind those boxes, so it was a good idea just to rock this whole area as well. And there you go. Now that's the view from that patio deck, from the back portion of the house, where you can see just a nice natural curves, and it really cleaned it up compared to that first photo. And make sure you always got to have a pink flamingo in the landscape setting. And there's just one more look at an angle, how that cleaned that whole area up. All right, that brings us back to the front, concludes this video, how we took a completely, well, really empty type landscape and just created something completely different, and a little bit breaking some of the rules, I would say, in landscaping. It's a pretty dramatic, overpowering, took up a lot of space in that turf, but overall, we liked how it turned out. That's all I've got for this video. I appreciate you stopping by. We'll see you again next video.